My name is Daniel Roy Greenfeld, and this is my talk about how to take, I mean, I have a bit of imposter syndrome, but I'd like to say average skills and leverage them into glorious success. So let's get into it. And of course, my slides aren't advancing. Here we go. Okay, so let's take a step back in time to 2004, which was, I guess, 18 years ago. And back then, I had long hair. And it's, well, you can see it's down to like the middle of my back. It's also curly and wavy. So if I brush it out, it would get, all the way down to the small of my back. So yeah, I had long hair back in the day. Anyway, at that time, I got an interview at NASA. And as a space geek, as someone who grew up wanting to be an astronomer or an astronaut, this is a dream come true. I mean, who wouldn't want to work at a space agency, right? Well, I couldn't imagine that NASA was going to hire me. I mean, sure, I lined up the interview, but that doesn't mean you have the job. And the reason for this was I didn't have a computer science degree. And at that point, I only had 7 years professional experience. And the world was a bit different then. There wasn't all this online learning stuff. So if you didn't have a computer science degree, there were, and I know this is still the case in places, but even more so back then, the door was shut. You weren't getting a job. So I couldn't imagine that NASA was going to give me a job without a computer science degree. So I came up with a plan. Since there was no way I could succeed at this, I came up with this crazy idea. And it was based off of a movie, a Jackie Chan movie, Meals on Wheels. He made it in 1984. And in his big fight scene, he's up against Benny Urquidez. And if you know anything about like older martial arts movies and martial artists, Benny Urquidez was a world-class kickboxer. He fought in the ring around the world, amazing fighter. And in this particular movie, when him and Jackie Chan start fighting, he just is cleaning Jackie's clock all over this epic living room in a castle. And it's an incredible, iconic fight. And Jackie's losing until he decides, I'm going to treat this fight as a practice session. And so he starts goofing around and trying out new things. And he ends up winning against Benny Urquidez. So I thought, okay, I can't succeed. So I'm not going to stress. I'm just going to try different things and see how they plan out. And so that way in future interviews, I will be able to like do better, right? So I'm considering an interview practice, just like Jackie considered his fight with Benny as a as a practice session. I was going to treat my interview as a practice session. And most importantly, I plan to have fun. Like, how often do you get to interview at, a place like NASA and meet NASA people? So how did it go? When I went to NASA, what kind of things did I do? Well, I answered a lot of questions, and a lot of them were typical interview questions, like, what's up? How do you do an outer join in SQL? And there are some Java questions, and there is also various like working questions, and this was one of them that I got. The interviewer, she asked me, what's my biggest weakness? And what I normally gave was something like this, which is where, hey, I'm so tied up emotionally in my work that if I don't do well, then I take it personally. So then I work harder and smarter and longer. So basically the typical answer you give to like one of those typical questions, right? And that's what I normally did. And I started to do that, and then I paused and I thought, wait a second, there's no way I'm getting this job, so I'm just gonna like say the first thing that comes to mind. And this is what I said. I said in an interview to get a job at NASA, I said I'm stupid and lazy. Well, The interviewer, to her credit, didn't say the words to this out loud, but I could see it in her eyes. Just, why no one says something like that in an interview, right? But again, and normally I wouldn't. Probably wouldn't do it now. But at that point, I was. This is a practice session. In any case, she didn't say these words, and I'm impressed to this day. But what she did say is, "Are you going to explain that?" And I paused for a couple seconds and thought quickly, and this is what I came up with. So first of all, I'm stupid, and I'm going to expound on it. Specifically, I can't figure things out. I told her I can't remember things, and I'm too stupid not to ask questions. So I'm going to go over each one of these items and explain what they mean, starting with I can't figure things out. So by that, I mean, I always look for libraries first. Why reinvent the wheel when the wheel already exists? The more that we can offload onto other people and tools, the better. And this can be anything from a big, large enterprisey project to a small one-off script. Don't make more work for yourself that you have to figure out. Like, remember that you're stupid. And a good example of this is argparse. For me, a lot of the Python that I do are these one-off scripts and tools. They're command line tools. And typically, I don't use argparse. Argparse is part of the Python standard library. But if you ask me how to do subcommands after a decade of trying to use argparse, I will say I still struggle with it. And I know that there are people who can figure it out, and they're in this audience. But if you're trying to solve a problem, if you're also trying to handle argparse's subcommands, are you really focusing on the problem at hand, or are you focusing on getting argparse to work? So we use libraries. My current favorite is Typer. It's incredible. And if you look at this, if you compare the two, this is, I guess it's like 7 or 8 lines of code versus all of this. I couldn't quite get this example to work for this talk, and I gave them, and I decided, hey, I'm just going to post this and know that it works, and I can share it with the audience. And at a glance, you can see what's happening, that there are 2 subcommands, foo and bar, that where y is a float, x is an integer with the default of 1, and it prints those values combined. And then there's bar, which takes z as a string argument and then displays it inside of parentheses. That is super straightforward. But this, which kind of sort of works, does the same thing, but it's a lot harder to tell what it's doing at a glance. So yeah, I want to be stupid. I want to work with this. So Typer is my current favorite, and it's based on Click. So if you're worried about, hey, what's it like under the hood? It's awesome under the hood. And I know there's competing libraries. If you're using them, that's great. The important thing is that you're not using argparse unless you're trying to write something like Typer. And Typer, if you're curious about it, check it out. It's awesome, and it's a great way to make command line scripts that are that just do what you want quickly and not have to fight argparse or trying to get sys.argv to do what you want. Okay, so let me continue. I'm gonna move on. So I'm too stupid to ask too stupid not to ask stupid questions. So what do I mean by that? Well, professionally speaking, I'm going to give you all a hint, and that is there are no stupid questions. More specifically, the only bad question that you will ever have is the one that you do not ask. If you don't know the answer to something, ask it, right? It's as simple as that. Like, swallow the ego, which is hard for some of us, myself included, and just ask the question. And professionally speaking, especially here at this event, don't try to impress people by not asking questions. If you don't know something and you have someone there who can answer the question, go and ask it. Don't be shy, because here's the important thing to remember, and that's that no one remembers. No one cares about a question that you ask. If you're worried that people might perceive it as a stupid question, maybe you might want to say, I think this might be a stupid question, but don't even worry about that. No one will remember for after a day or two, if they even remember past a few minutes. So no one cares what questions you ask. No one remembers what questions you ask, but what they will remember is that you asked questions. So ask those questions. Another part of this is I like to obey the 30-minute rule when it comes to stupid questions. And I described this on my blog, but I'm going to summarize it pretty quickly. And yeah, that's me at my first computer. I was an adolescent, and I got pretty decent at asking questions at that age. The rule is, don't waste more than 30 minutes on a problem without asking questions. So if you are stuck, like not making progress, ask the question. Don't take hours or days or months to do it. And if you're an engineering manager, this is important, because if your staff aren't asking questions in 30 or 60 minutes, instead they're taking days or weeks, which can happen, to resolve something because there might be something someone doesn't know, that's money that's being wasted because this person isn't asking questions. So I strongly encourage, as an engineering leader, that you encourage your staff to do it. But the important thing is ask those questions. Just get out there and ask them. And you don't have to stick to 30 minutes. Some people do 60 minutes. I know, depending on the shop size, like smaller shops will sometimes increase it up to 2 hours. The important thing, though, is that those those questions are asked and no one is slighted or attacked because they asked questions. In fact, at my job at Octopus, if someone questions why you're asking a question, Octopus is a great place to work, unless you attack someone for asking a question, in which case we'll take you aside and explain to you, don't do that. Now, there's one important thing I should bring up when it comes to asking questions, and don't be this kid. If you're asking questions in a room of people from a person who can answer them, after you ask a couple of questions, like, ask if other people have questions. Let other people get a chance to find out what they need to know. Don't hog that golden time. Be a good, I guess, community player. So yeah, that's yeah, so that was me back in the day. I think I'd like to think I've grown since then. Okay, let's move on past my photo of back when I had hair like that, and I'm going to talk about how I can't remember things. It's true. I struggle to remember details and all kinds of things. My long-term memory is great. My short-term memory, not so much. And I think a lot of people are like that, or it might even be reversed. They remember details immediately, but then they forget them down the road. So what can we do to improve, or what do I do and what do others do to improve their memory? And the first thing is doc strings. Anytime they code, they're sticking in comments. They're there's mechanisms in code to do this. If you're first coming into a project and you're trying to figure out how like some complicated code works, like comment each line of the code. That's what I do. If sometimes people say, why are you commenting every line of code? And it's like, well, because I'm trying to like figure out what's going on. One of the neat things, though, is that with type hints, you can reduce the size of the doc strings. Rather than having to write out, for example, what the arguments mean and what the return values are, type hints gives us the ability to fly right past that. For example, here, with type hints, I don't have to write that y is a float, x is an integer with the default of 1. Type hints tells me that. It's my favorite feature of it. I know that in theory, it's supposed to reduce bugs, and IDEs can like do some neat things within. Typer can infer from this what the arguments are for a particular function. But personally, what I like the most about type hints is it reduces the volume of how much I have to write down in my doc strings, which means I can focus on the logic, which is really what I care about. The next thing I'm a believer of, and I know that there's still components of the Python community that are on other tools, but really use Markdown. Markdown is super easy to learn, and it's portable. It works everywhere, not just in Python. And the thing is I used to be a huge fan of restructured text, and even when I was working in it daily, I was constantly having to look stuff up. Whereas with Markdown, I within a month or two I knew everything, and I don't think I ever look up something in Markdown anymore. And that happened within 2 or 3 months of really getting into using Markdown. So yeah, use Markdown. It reduces friction in your docs. And also what's super awesome about Markdown is as a logo, which I guess is important because every project has a logo, but yeah, it's a format with a logo. Something else with when you can't remember about remembering things is take notes. Right, if you're listening to this, if I were listening to this, I would be taking notes of everything. I'd be trying to capture what the speaker was saying. I would try to be writing down the slides, and this way I could look it up later. I could refer to it later. And my notes, I'd know, physically sort of in my head where those notes were, rather than having to try to find them on YouTube or whatever slide deck tool the speaker had. The thing is when you write notes down, for a lot of people, it enhances your learning. It sort of like building muscle memory of the information. If you're just passively listening, sure, you can absorb stuff, but again, a lot of people just learn better by taking notes. And another thing is, if you are trying to impress those people around you, taking notes typically looks better than if you're just sitting back and listening, because that's just been my observation is which side of things looks better. And if you want to see some of the note-taking processing I took back in the day, I used to have on Read the Docs, I captured years of notes for about 7 or 8 years. I was just, everything I did that was public, I put into these event notes. And I even would I would do what was called live noting, which was I would like tweet out and post on social media, here are my notes, and just I'd be committing constantly to GitHub to get Read the Docs to pick it up, so that way people could see my notes in progress. And I wasn't the only person doing it. There were some other engineers at the time doing it. One of them, for example, was Kenneth Love, who is a fantastic software engineer. He works at O'Reilly, and he is he did the same thing. And I would like to think part of the reason for his success is that he embraced this as well, of like taking notes, acknowledging that he couldn't remember things, and just documenting the heck out of what he was trying to learn, so that way he would super duper reinforce his knowledge. The other thing about doing all this documentation, and I touched on this a little bit already, is that documentation it makes me look good. It's true. When I can pull out old tech details that others don't have because they didn't document, I look like a king. This has happened again and again for decades, that the people who don't take notes and are trying to remember off their head, they don't have it. They just don't have the resource that I've captured. Sure, they can try Google, or they can look at try to find stuff in Stack Overflow, and try to look past the locked answers that are way out of date. Or internally in the job, there's private details that haven't been captured. Yeah, you want to have all these details available to you. And if you're sharing them with people, and not just keeping them in your like private little chest. But if you're sharing them with details, that also makes you look good. And even better, those notes and the code examples you write down can be used on later projects, unless it's like super proprietary stuff. But I'm talking about open source or concepts about programming that you're learning. These can be of immeasurable value as you move on to other projects and jobs. And my favorite example of this is 2 Scoops of Django. The core of what became 2 Scoops of Django was based off of notes, private and public, that I had taken. And it was just a matter of rewriting them into a particular voice. And I'm not saying that you should write books, because that's crazy hard. And I don't think I wish it on my enemies. But if you are planning to write a book, or if you do want to help look good on your job or in your career, it's a great way to make a difference in how things in your trajectory. And I'm not the only one who has had success for this. The Python request library, I mean, sure, yeah, at the time it was launched, the APIs for working with HTTP and Python were really challenging, and that was an issue at the time. But let's face it, the docs for requests are pretty solid, and that certainly is part of the success of the project. And the same thing goes for Fast API. If you read the docs, Sebastian, who is the creator and leader of the project, he has this way of capturing thought and his ideas that really shines. And that is part of the explosive success of Fast APIs, that the docs are just clear and they're concise. And I'm not saying that if you document well, that your project will be, an outsized success like Fast API and requests, but the chances of that happening will go up if you document. And more importantly, later on, when you can't remember stuff, you'll be able to return to it and have those things documented. So yeah, documentation can make you look good too. Okay, let's move on. So I said I'm stupid and lazy. So let's cover the lazy part of what I told the NASA interviewer. So to summarize, I don't want to do anything twice. I don't want to debug code that worked before, and I don't want to look hard for things, especially docs. So here we go. What did I say about that? So for starters, if you know anything, if you've written much software, you've run into the concept of don't repeat yourself or dry, which is where if you write the same code twice, stick it in a function so that way you are not copy pasting. It reduces the number of errors, and it just means you have a more consistent programming experience. And then on top of that, again, I mentioned this earlier, I use type hints because I'm lazy. I don't want to have to write so much in the way of documentation, although documentation is good. You want to be as efficient as possible. So yeah, use type hints. And then once I'm happy with the function, I will stick it and some siblings into a utils module, so that way I can reuse it. And maybe it's easier to like port it between areas, or at least I know where it is. And then of course I'll commit that to GitHub in some capacity so I don't lose it. And then I will put it up on whatever package registry for the language I'm operating in. And this is the foundation of open source, is this concept of taking tools and patterns that we use and bundling them up so that way we can use them again, or others can use them and they can be lazy as well. So I think being stupid and lazy benefits the entire open source software community, which of course by extension the commercial world takes advantage of our stupidity and laziness. So yeah, that's that's open source for you. Okay, moving on. I don't want to like fix stuff that I had working before. And the reason for that is because manually testing code that was working before is hard. It's a pain. It's boring. And the other thing is it's error prone, right? If humans are bored, we just tend to make mistakes. We don't pay attention, so we miss things. And then the end result is more bugs. And so then we have to do more work. So the answer to this is write tests, right? Like if you have a bug, write a test for the bug as you're fixing it. If you're writing new code, get some tests in. I'm not necessarily a proponent of test-driven development. I don't believe that you have to have 100% test coverage. Even 70, 80% is great. Heck, 40% is fine. The important thing is that you have some tests and that you try to add tests over time. It'll just save you a lot of extra work in the long run. Even if there's a little bit of work up front, just when you get especially further down into a project, it becomes more important. But what's really important about tests is you need to write down how to run the tests, preferably in the README. It should be really easy to find. There are projects that I've encountered or I've created where testing instructions weren't clear, and even though there were tests, those tests weren't run. And you shouldn't tell someone, oh, just look at the continuous integration notes that explains how to do it. That's like, what happens if the CI breaks, right? What happens if the vendor goes away or something like that happens? Or if you just want to run it locally, having the instructions of how to run those tests will save you grief. Maybe not now, but it will in the future. And also for anyone else who encounters a library, they're not like trying to get a hold of you and saying, how do I run tests? So yeah, write that down. And that brings us to, I don't want to look hard for docs. Every single README needs to cover installation, running the code, and of course, testing the code. People should not have to look hard for these critical items. Every time I come into a project, that's the first thing I look for. And if I don't see it, I am working on a pull request to fix it. Even if I don't own the project, it's like if it's not clear in the README or the README doesn't link to whatever docs have it, it doesn't have very clear instructions. This is where you go to do these things. That's a pull request for me. So super important. Of course, longer form docs, you link to read the docs, GitHub pages, whatever. But the really important thing is every project should have this critical information to README. I shouldn't have to look hard. I shouldn't be having to find the person who does it. So I'm lazy. Okay, so I explained I'm stupid and lazy. And I guess that was pretty much the answer that I gave. And I just did it more succinctly back in the day. So the question is did I get the job at NASA? And yeah, I did. So I pulled off probably what was the craziest question in interviewing history. I don't necessarily think that you should do this, that you should say, hey, Daniel Roy Greenfeld said I'm stupid and lazy in a NASA interview, so I'm going to be mildly obnoxious in an interview and I'll get hired. Understand that in hindsight, I was lucky. I had a really good day. And specifically, I want to thank Sharon Campbell, who was my interviewer. My hiring manager there, she is a vision. I'd like to think is a visionary because she hired me, or she was at least patient to listen to one engineer. She was one of my favorite managers ever. I learned a ton from her, especially about leading groups. Sharon, if you're watching this video, please contact me. My company could use your talents. We'll get you a job, whatever you want. So yeah, anyway, so yeah, much gratitude to Sharon. My point, though, is that not everyone gets interviewed by a Sharon Campbell. Don't don't expect that because I managed to pull it off that you will. And I'm not sure I'll ever pull anything like that off again. Okay, so let's talk about my time at NASA. It was an incredible, life-changing experience, and it certainly has been the cornerstone of my career. And I was there that I learned Python. I got started in Django. I started a number of open source projects, including one that eventually became Django Crispy Forms. I learned about climate change. That it was, I think, 2006 when the modern understanding of climate change really came to the fore. And I met my wife, and that was, you know, another life-changing part of working at the life-changing experience of NASA. And one thing I did is I coded a lot. I got a lot of code in, and let's talk about that for a few minutes. Hold on, let me take a sip. Okay, so I've actually written about this. If you, on my blog, there's a post that's on the homepage called Code, Code, Code. And I'm going to summarize what it's talking about here, because I think it's a critical part of the software engineering experience. And that is, if you want to get good at anything, you have to practice. There's, you know, I'll give you a good example. I'm going to expound on this. We're all here at Python WebConf, and it's a great event, and we're learning all kinds of new things. And what's super important is if you encounter something that you think is neat, even if your day-to-day work isn't using it, you go and use it. Find a little spare time, or create a side project for work or for personal, and use it. Like, actually see what it does. And otherwise you're going to lose it. It's just going to be a memory. And then like a few years later, there's going to be one of these projects that takes off, or that you're hearing about, or maybe you could got hired to do or work on a project with it, but you can't because you didn't use it. You didn't explore it. So there's one, there's the practice of it to get better with it and to learn it, and two is the opportunity to try new things is right now. And so that brings me to a critical point, which is always be typing, always be the active participant. So this isn't just taking notes, like I said earlier, but taking what you're learning and going and using it as fast as you can. Try to make that time. And speaking about always be typing, another thing I want to bring up is pairing, pair programming. It's this great technique where you have two engineers sitting together, and one of them is on the keyboard typing away, and the other person is looking over their shoulder, either physically or virtually, you know, and like commenting, and they're working out a problem together. And it's a great idea. But if you are trying to improve as a software programmer, be the person typing. Don't be the person looking over the shoulder. If you're the junior in the room and you're working with the senior, try to be the person typing. Super duper important. You have to be practicing. Looking over someone's shoulder just means you're a spectator. And yes, you should be active. You should be commenting on the code as it's being changed. But if you want to get the maximum output and result from that pairing session, be the person typing. Even if you don't understand what you're typing, the process of typing it out is much better than watching someone else type it. And the same thing goes for a class. If you are taking a class, like always be typing, right? Like take notes. Do the exercises, like get all this stuff done completely. You have to be practicing. And in fact, if there's no exercises in the class, if it's more theoretical, especially if you're like as a senior engineer in Python, which is a language I know really well, if I go and listen to a theoretical discussion, I will pick up a lot more out of it than a junior engineer who doesn't have the foundation on which to build. It is really hard to really learn theory until you have a foundation. And I know that in a lot of programming, like especially university classes, they teach theory and then you learn practical application, and that's kind of backwards. The but if you're a junior and you run into a theoretical class, go and find a more foundational class and work on that before you jump into theory. But the point is let's say your instructor is teaching what's considered practical application, and there's no exercises, and it's supposed to be practical. Then you're watching a spectator sport. You're watching a software engineer type out code. And that's something that there's nothing wrong with watching it. You will learn as a spectator, but just not as fast. The point is that mastery can't be found as a spectator. You cannot watch something and get really, really good at it. You can maybe build basic skills, but you're not going to be as good as you can be. There was back in the days when I used to get a lot of startup meetups, startup events, like you'd see all these people come in who had watched The Social Network, and they thought because they had watched The Social Network and then they come to these meetups, then they would become tech CEOs, and they just sit there and watch. And then they wouldn't do anything. But yeah, they would stand up and say, yeah, I watched The Social Network and I'm here to become a CEO. And it's like, that you can't do as a spectator. You can only do if you get involved. And similarly, you can't win at sports by watching TV, right? Like there's no way you can watch a bunch of football games. You might learn the rules, but you're not really learning how to play. To switch over to martial arts, as someone who's done it for a long time, the modern version of this is you have people who watch UFC and then they go into a Brazilian jiu-jitsu gym and they think that they can crush because they've watched a bunch of the UFC. And every jiu-jitsu gym knows about this because they always get these guys, it's always guys, of course, who come in and think that they're experts without ever having done it. And then they go onto the mat and they just discover how uncomfortable it is until you're used to actually doing it. So yeah, don't be a spectator. To master anything, it doesn't matter what it is, but especially coding, because that's what we're here to talk about, you have to practice. Perfection comes through repetition and practice and building up the muscle memory in your typing fingers. You always need to be typing. Don't be passive. Again, if you're pairing, ask to be the person steering. Just take a more active role, and that will help guarantee your progress, your increased progress over time. So again, the article that I wrote, it's on my blog. It's called Code, Code, Code. Read it. I spelled out a bit more. So, okay. About me, I like to save this to the end, so that way you can know a little bit about who I am. My name is Daniel Roy Greenfeld. I'm known often on the internets as PyDanny. I am a software engineer. I am an engineering manager, and sometimes I give talks. I am also the author of a series of best-selling Django books with my co-author and lovely wife, Audrey. And it's gone through many editions. We have a daughter. This is our little girl. She's actually a couple of years older than this, but I like the NASA reference on the one half of the picture. And I'm employed at a job called a company called Octopus Energy, and we are working to give her and other children the best planet possible. So if you want to use your skills to fight climate change, if you want to join me in becoming a planet-saving superhero, kind of like Batman fights crime with his skills, we fight climate change with our skills. So we're superheroes. Please join us. So we're hiring in the United States and around the world. So that's my talk. Any questions?